Media's ability to shape events is not always positive. It particularly tends to oppose anything new, like the right to vote for women. Remember suffragette Lucretia Mott's observation that the press went through 3 stages in regard to reforms. They first ridicule them, then report them without comment, and at last openly advocate them. The news media are businesses and share the ideals of American free enterprise. As a result, they tend to serve the powerful. In the media's opposition to women's suffrage and support of women working during World War II, we saw examples of the news media willingly serving the propaganda needs of existing power structures. By the late 19th century, modern printing presses could produce more newspapers and magazines faster. The problem now was how to sell more papers. Rich publishers like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer created newspapers to appeal to mass audiences, including workers, women, and immigrants. Muckraking and stunts like Nellie Bly's undercover expose of an insane asylum accomplished good things, but the primary goal was to sell newspapers. An outgrowth of this was yellow journalism. In his defense of yellow journalism, reporter James Creelman praised it as the journalism that acts. Yellow journals didn't wait for news to happen. They would create events, if necessary, to drive circulation increases. The Spanish-American War is the best example of news created by a desire to sell more newspapers. Our textbook author gives courageous journalists credit for exposing and destroying the Ku Klux Klan. But then he writes about Father Charles Conklin, the popular radio priest of the 1930s who blamed Jews for what was wrong with the world. We read his radio broadcast entitled "Someone Must Be Blamed." Conklin casts himself as a defender of democracy, capitalism, the Constitution, and even the Supreme Court. All are in mortal danger, he says. His broadcast not only laid blame, it was meant to inspire fear, shame, and hatred. Contrast this with President Franklin Roosevelt's speech that said, "We have nothing to fear, but fear itself." FDR wanted Americans to give up their prejudices and work together. Conklin was a demagogue who played on the mean spirits within us to oppose FDR and the New Deal. Demagogues like radio priest Conklin and dictator Adolf Hitler use many techniques to manipulate their audiences. A demagogue may try to intimidate you with shouting. He might try to shame you into obeying. He'll tell you that you must act now. There's no time to think. He'll say that there are simple solutions to complex problems. A demagogue will always know exactly who is to blame. He may make promises he can't keep. He may claim that he's only saying all this for your own good. Again, you don't have to memorize all the methods I've listed on this slide, but you should be able to list at least some of them. Take a moment to understand them. Our textbook author says U.S. journalism failed when Senator Joseph McCarthy's unfounded accusations were reported without challenge, and that this was because the news media, especially the wire services, valued objectivity above all else. McCarthy was an expert at using the press to his advantage. He timed his news releases perfectly. Some journalists may have been too afraid to challenge or even double-check the senator's charges. It's also possible that Republican publishers approved of McCarthy's attacks on Democrats. Television, and especially television newsman Edward R. Murrow, helped bring down McCarthy by showing what a bully he was. But his real mistake may have been attacking the Army, a veiled criticism of Republican President Dwight Eisenhower. After that, the news media let McCarthy drop from sight. The Vietnam War seemed more immediate and more brutal than previous wars. The difference was television. Its moving pictures and live sound brought the war right into the living room. TV showed us when Marines burned the village of Cam Knee with cigarette lighters, and Alabama police beat civil rights marchers. Readers might think a newspaper story was untrue, or that its fuzzy, still pictures showed only part of the truth. With TV, there was no denying the truth of what we saw in moving pictures in living color. Up to the time of the Pentagon Papers, the government and the news media played a secrets game. The government kept secret everything it could. The news media pried out everything it could. In practice, this meant that the government could manipulate the news media by selectively leaking secrets it wanted to know. When Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, though, government found itself walking around in its underwear. Suddenly, we knew why the U.S. was fighting the Vietnam War, mostly to avoid an embarrassing defeat. Everything changed after the Pentagon Papers, one New York Times reporter said. From now on, the news media would choose what to reveal and what to keep secret. Daniel Ellsberg put himself at great personal risk when he leaked the Pentagon Papers. He had to leak it to many newspapers, hoping some, at least, would be willing and able to print the story. If the news media chose to cooperate with the government in keeping the secret, Ellsberg would go to prison without accomplishing anything. Decades later, we saw how the Los Angeles Times betrayed a whistleblower who wanted to warn Americans that their government was spying on them. Are today's news media really so gutless that they would turn in a whistleblower rather than confront the government? Think about the reaction a news organization faces when it points out problems. 9/11 is one example. In the view of our textbook author, U.S. journalists failed to act when Al-Qaeda attacked on 9/11/2001. According to him, journalists failed to tell the public why America was attacked. The news media probably feared that listing the reasons Osama bin Laden attacked would be considered unpatriotic, an attempt to justify the attacks. But without the real explanation, President Bush was allowed to make up his own explanation and use it as a justification for starting an unrelated war in Iraq. The Washington Post's dogged coverage of the Watergate break-in began the process that brought down a Republican president. You heard Miami Herald editor Pat Andrews tell you how Watergate inspired her to become a journalist. Watergate and the movie All the President's Men inspired journalists to tackle corruption in government and other wrongs in American society. There was a reaction. Rush Limbaugh and other right-wing radio broadcasters routinely criticize the mainstream news media, which they say is biased. I think they're really reacting to a news media that, after Watergate, felt empowered to right wrongs and improve America. Rush Limbaugh and others would rather that America stay the way he said it used to be. Thank you for listening to this review for the final. I hope it helps. I want to thank my wife, FAU adjunct professor Bonnie Gross, for helping put this together. And I wish you luck on the exam.